Welcome everybody. It's great to see you all here. There's a few people that will come in. They've been delayed with the wet weather, so we'll still kick off as so many of you are here on time. Vice-Chancellor, special guests, staff and students, and members of the community. Welcome to the inaugural Workplace Gender Equality Agency, WGEA Pay Equity Leadership Forum at Edith, Cowan University. Before I begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the past and present traditional custodians of this land on which we are meeting, the Noongar elders and people. We are likely to have a couple of politicians wander in as well, so if they do, I'll acknowledge them when they do, but it's a busy time of year leading up to the election. And ECU is really proud to be hosting this event that we think will be the first of many pay equity forums across the country. If you need any assistance during the session, the corporate events staff can help you. Certainly it's all signed how to get to the facilities. Our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Steve Chapman, became a WGEA Pay Equity Ambassador in 2016 specifically to achieve change. And I'm not sure how many of you managed to listen to Drive Time last night at 5:15, ABC Radio, but certainly Steve was on, and you wouldn't need any convincing that my statement is correct. He's serious about achieving change, he's not just talking about it. At ECU, achieving gender equality is critical to us, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because anything else just doesn't make good business sense. In December 2016, we received a citation from WGEA as an employer of choice for gender equality. Late 2015, we were successful with our submission to become a member of the first tranche of the first pilot of the Australian Athena Swan Charter. The Athena Swan Charter, for those of you who may not know, is an international evaluation and accreditation scheme that addresses the achievement of better redressing gender inequities through policies and practices in science, technology, engineering, mathematics and medicine. But it's not limited to STEM, and also it's not about policies, it's actually about change at the most local level. By addressing the issues in recruitment, retention, promotion and progression of women and gender diverse groups in academia, we hope to proactively provide a much more productive and healthier environment for staff and students of all genders. But we actually have quite a few challenges ahead of us. As it stands today, WA has the biggest gender pay gap of any Australian state or territory, with women working full-time for WA-based employers earning on average 30.9% less than men. And it's 17. This difference is over $43,000 a year in the full-time total remuneration of women and men in the 15-16 financial year. And it's alarming when you compare it to the national average total remuneration gender pay gap of 23.1%. or nearly 27,000. So we are behind the rest of the country. And we actually don't quite know why. We've tried to look at the reasons behind that, but perhaps the panel can give us some insights. WA also has the lowest representation of women at all levels of management and leadership, including as CEOs and chairs of governing boards. Based on WA employers who report to WGEA, female chairs of governing boards in WA sits at about 10.7%, yet the Australian average is 12.9%, and female CEOs in WA comprise 12.6% of all CEOs, and the Australian average sits at 16.3%. Gender segregation is a systemic challenge on both a national and global scale, and a particular challenge in WA. So through initiatives such as Athena Swan, we already know that diversity in the workplace leads to greater business performance. There's evidence, greater innovation and much more creativity. Significant change is necessary though if we want to cultivate a talent pool and in turn the breadth of our workforce capacity, our global competitiveness and prosperity as a nation. We need to examine the level of our representation of women in leadership roles, return to work rates after parental leave, and access to flexible work arrangements in order to begin the immediate task of transforming our workplace cultures to those that are inclusive. And something that's a bit of a pet topic for me is we need to actually counter-program so that we address all the unconscious biases that are around, all 150 of them, and we also need to do some counter-programming to redress gender stereotypes that actually start as early as 5 to 7 years of age. Today our theme is about increasing the pace of change in WA, and joining me, we're very fortunate to have Libby Lyons, the Director of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, and she can talk about the objectives of WGEA, the core causes and factors relating to gender pay disparity in WA and on a much broader scale. And gender equality is a central business issue, but Libby can talk about much more, and I'm sure she will. And for the panel questions, Libby will join our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Steve Chapman, and our guest, Mr. Andrew Smith, Shell's Country Chair in Australia and Executive Vice President of the company's upstream businesses in Australia and New Zealand, and about to relocate to London, I hear, for a global role. And the panel segment will then be followed by an opportunity for questions from the floor. Now, both Steve and Andrew are WGEA Pay Equity Ambassadors, and I know how passionately they both feel about creating a culture of equality and diversity within the workplace, and we're really honoured that they're able to join us today. I'd now like to ask you to give Libby a warm welcome as opposed to the weather that she has received. Thanks.
Thank you, Kobe, for that very warm welcome. And yes, I consider Western Australia to be my home. I'm just having a sabbatical, rather busy sabbatical in Sydney for the moment, for the next 4 years of a 5-year appointment. And I always love coming back to Perth, of course, because my friends and everybody's here. And I was fully expecting a beautiful Perth summer to welcome me. And as I checked the weather as I was running out of the house on Wednesday, I saw the forecast and I grabbed a pair of boots, and I'm so pleased that I did because I've worn them non-stop. Thank you for coming here. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners, past, present and future, the Noongar people on whose land we meet today. I'd also like to thank Stephen and Andrew for being here. They are great leaders in Australia, great leaders. They take the issue of gender equality seriously, but more importantly, they are doing something to address it. They are doing something very positive to ensure that we sort out this issue of pay equity in particular. So it's an absolute privilege to share today with them. And the work that Kobe's done here at ECU to become an employer of choice last year with our agency has been phenomenal. And she deserves a hearty round of applause for the hard work that she put in. So the Workplace Gender Equality Agency was set up as a result of the Workplace Gender Equality Act 2012. We are based in Sydney, and every organisation that has more than, in the private sector, that has more than 100 employees reports into us on an annual basis. Our data set covers roughly 40% of Australian workplaces and around 4 million employees. In November, we released our latest data set, and as Kobe mentioned, the pay gap, the national pay gap, sits at 23.1% based on total remuneration. It's a difference of nearly $27,000 per year, and it's not great. As Kobe said, we're in 2017. The sad thing is Western Australia is worse, and it's the worst state in the country in terms of the pay gap. The pay gap being at 30.9% is fine to try and determine when you're looking at dollars, but it can be hard to get your head around it. So a bright spark in my office asked our head of research to find a really practical way of giving an example of what that pay gap meant in practice. So they took the Airbus that I flew over on the way from Sydney to Perth, the A330, and if the pay gap represented the seats on that Airbus, men would have 50 more seats on that plane than women. If we go to the heart of what is very, very important for many women in the room today, if that pay gap was a block of Margaret River chocolate, men would get 10 squares and women would get 7. Life is too short for us not to get our fair share of chocolate. So we really must do something about this, if for nothing else than we get our share of the chocolate bar. Addressing pay equity in Australia makes good business sense. The business case is very, very clear. In 2015, McKinsey's published the results of a survey that they conducted where they looked at 366 companies across Canada, the US and the UK. They found that companies within the top quartile for gender diversity were 15% more likely to have higher financial returns than their national industry medians. Gender equity is known to improve innovation and productivity. These are two factors that in Western Australia in particular we are going to need, because we need to expand the economy into areas that haven't been traditionally seen as West Australian ones. And if we don't have that innovation and we don't get that productivity, we're not going to see the revenue for Western Australia increase. So it makes sense even in that sense. West Australians are, Kobe mentioned all of these things, that, only 2 out of every 10 WA employees are analysing their pay gap. Only 2 out of 10. If you don't do it, it's one of those classic situations. You don't know what you don't know. And it shouldn't be something that scares you. It should be something that challenges you to move forward, to ensure that we provide fair and equitable workplaces for everybody, regardless of gender. We know that WA organisations are very aware of gender equality and the need to look at it and have it in their organisations or a strategy or policy in place, because 7 in 10 employers in WA have a policy or strategy in place. Unfortunately, they're not taking that information that they have and sorting out strategies and targets to improve the problem in their organisation. Our data this year, for the last year, showed that WA has the fewest female employees of any state at roughly 40%. Every other state in Australia has a 50-50 balance. WA has the fewest female managers in the country. Only 3 out of every 10 females are managers, and 1 out of every 10 CEOs. If we look at the national average, Australia has broadly 16% of CEOs are women. It's still not flash, but 16%. WA's is 12. 37% of managers across Australia are women. In WA, it's 31. So we are trailing behind, and we really need to do something about that. The WA workforce is also highly segregated. 52% of professionals in WA are women, but less than 10% are tradies or techies. This is not unusual. This is a pattern we see replicated across Australia, and it's a big concern. The Senate have announced an inquiry into industry segregation, and the submissions for that close on the 3rd of March. It is a huge issue in Australia, and overwhelmingly we are seeing more women. 90% of graduates last year who came out of university were overwhelmingly moving into female-dominated industries, and the same applied to men. We have to challenge that. We have to challenge the thinking, we have to challenge the teaching, and we have to challenge our kids. Health care and social assistance has the largest number of women nationally, female employees nationally, than any other industry. But interestingly, it's also the biggest growth industry. In fact, the 5 years before 2015, leading up to 2015, health care and social assistance saw more new jobs created than any other industry in WA. That really surprised me when I saw that stat. Really surprised me. So we've got a lot of people who, because of what's happening with resources and the economy and whatever, are having to leave and maybe take part-time work in the resources industry, and yet we have this growth industry where men are reluctant to move into, and a lot of that is about culture, and a lot of that is because they're scared. They're scared because they don't want to be judged, but they're also scared because they know the pay's not as good. But sadly, we know from the States that the more men we get into female-dominated industries, guess what? The pay goes up. So men shouldn't be afraid, and we shouldn't judge them, and we must challenge other men if they start calling them a sissy or something for wanting to go into a female-dominated industry, because we need them. 1 in 10 nurses in Australia are men. Health Department tells us that by 2025 we're going to be short of nurses to the tune of about 137,000. Where are we going to get them? Plenty of work for women, but it's our men that are going to need work as well. We need to start really taking responsibility and encouraging men and women to look outside the square, to think beyond what we've always thought in the past, that nursing's a good career for girls. I'm pleased to say that there are many leaders, business leaders in the male-dominated industries who are really trying to get some more women into the workforce, and by insisting, for instance, that there's an equal split of males and females when recruiting, with graduates in particular. So that's good, but we need to see that happen more in the female-dominated industries, and it's happening a little bit. Mercy Health, for instance, in Victoria, have recently, around the Shepparton area, gone out to the local high schools and have been encouraging the senior students in the school to volunteer in some of their aged care facilities. They've focused on the young men. They've had overwhelming success. These young men have volunteered in the aged care facilities, they've finished their stint, they've actually volunteered to do more, but more importantly, they're now seriously considering a career in healthcare and social assistance. Fabulous result. Not a difficult thing to do. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It just takes some innovation and implementation. Another company that are doing great things is MYOB. MYOB did a pay gap analysis and discovered that they had a real hotspot. They had a pay gap, and the reason that they had a pay gap was that their coding area, where their employees were all paid really well, were all men. So they decided that in order to address that pay gap, what they needed to do was encourage more women. But there weren't a lot of women out there who would apply for these jobs or had the skills. So what they did was they've designed a 12-week intensive course, and they've opened it up to women who have been out of the workforce for some time, are happy to retrain and want to come back in. They were overwhelmed with applications when they advertised the roles, the training courses. They chose them, they've started that 12-week intensive course, and by the end of it, those women should be at graduate level. So it's pretty intensive, but they should be at graduate level. And then they'll be looking to employ them, or they can move on into other roles in other organisations. So there's plenty, there's a little bit happening, but we just need to see more of it. And finally, I think we've got to look at the whole issue of flexibility in the workplace. And we have to, in particular, give men real permission to work flexibly. We're finding that men do want to work flexibly, but overwhelmingly, they're being denied access to working flexibly, and they feel judged by their peers and their superiors if they do work flexibly. We have this culture in Australia where you've got to sit at your desk for a minimum of 8 hours a day to be seen to be doing a good job. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. We've got to start focusing on outcomes. We've got to start focusing on the best way that people can work. And that way, we will start to see some real results. But sitting at a desk, staring at a computer, doesn't do that. My son recently did an internship at a legal firm in Sydney, and he came home to me one night and he said, "Mum, how do these people sit there and concentrate for all those hours in the day?" And I said, "Darling, they don't." I said, "Do me a favour, tomorrow when you go in, be really, go around, and as you're going around, look at what's on their screen." He did that. He came back, he said, "You're right, Mum." He said one bloke was looking for a pair of shoes. There was another girl buying some theatre tickets. He said everywhere I went, they weren't actually working. And I said, "No, because you can't. None of us can sit and concentrate for that long. It's ridiculous." So we need to start challenging this presenteeism. And we need to recognise that if we want real productivity and we want to get the best out of our people, then we have to look at the way we work. And working flexibly is a really big positive step to that. So flexible work is really a mechanism by which we can allow women and men to meet their KPIs at work, but more importantly at home as well. I know it all sounds daunting, but it's not really. WA has always been a state that rewards hard work. It has amazing enthusiasm. It is innovative, and with commitment and effort and the real WA can-do spirit, we're going to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Libby. And just back to me for a minute, Kobe Rudd, Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Strategic Partnerships for ECU. For those of you who've come in a bit late, and I know the weather hasn't been helpful, and I'd like to welcome Simone McGurk, MLA, Shadow Minister for Community Services, Children's Interests and Women's Interests, and Member for Fremantle. Thanks for making it, Simone, leading up to the election. So we now get on to the bit where it's interactive with the panel, and then after that there'll be time for questions from all of you. So I'll facilitate the questions, and then you'll get your opportunity. And we're going to just have a bit of a warm-up with Steve, ECU's Vice-Chancellor, and this is just a bit of a intro. What does gender equality mean to you and ECU, Steve?
Well, actually, I think your preamble and Libby's excellent presentation kind of summed up what it means to me. I mean, it's about maximising the benefits to the workforce of a gender diverse workforce. So it means to me fairness, it means opportunity, it means the elimination of bias. It's as simple as that. But I just want to add one tiny further thing, because we got some really torrid statistics about poor old WA there being behind on everything. But there is one area where WA in gender equality leads the country, in fact perhaps the world, and that's in Vice-Chancellors. Because 80% of the Vice-Chancellors in Western Australia are women. And if you do the gender pay gap analysis, it is massively in favour of women. So I'm glad I'm contributing to the improvements in this state.
See, I told you all that Steve was going to do something. So our guest, Andrew Smith, Shell's country chair in Australia and executive vice president of companies upstream businesses in Australia and New Zealand, for those of you who missed the start. Andrew, as Libby mentioned, WA has the fewest female managers of all the states and territories, sitting at 31.8% of managers are women in WA. So the question there is, are targets the answer? And if so, how do you implement them effectively?
So, to me, targets are part of the answer, and they're a really important part of the answer. But in themselves, they just aren't enough, because what we're trying to get is a more deep-seated change than just the numbers. Getting that culture of diversity, and diversity in a couple of ways, and diversity and we're here today to talk about gender, but Australia has become an increasingly multicultural country as well. So working out how to get the best out of everybody who comes to work, regardless of sex, race, religion. This is going to take more than just targets. But when it comes to closing the gender pay gap and the sort of opportunity gap, I do think targets do have a big role to play. Certainly that's one of the ways that we go about it. And some of those targets can be very analytical, and sometimes you just don't know what to do, but you know that actually the right target is just to do better than you did last year. So just when you don't know, stick +1, +2 against some of these numbers, like how many of the leadership team are female. But it might not be you know what the right answer is. The right answer is to get to 50%. But then there's lots of reasons why you might not be able to do that the next year, the year after year after. We just put +1 in and making movement. If I could just come back to comment on the why it's important. I just wanted to share a story from my past, which is kind of what drives me on this. So I used to run Shell's business in the South Pacific. One of the countries was Fiji. And the workforce was pretty evenly split between Indo-Fijians and Fijians. And you could see the tensions in there, and just the way different people looked at each other. And those of you who have studied the Pacific know this really well. And so you can just see the product of unfairness in a workplace. And gender is another one of those examples. I worked in Saudi Arabia for a while as well, and you see it between the different sects there as well, about the opportunities that are open to one group of people that aren't open to another. And to me, that's a real powerful motivation for this. There is a really strong business case, absolutely, but it's also just this thing about fairness.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think it's great if the panel peppers their answers with some stories, because I know you've all got them. And I think that also, as the discussion goes on, we'll probably hear other words beyond targets, such as quotas and sponsorship, and even targets with teeth. So I'll wait for
Let's
that.
get to that. Yep.
Yeah, good. Steve, we'll come to you again. Going on parental leave can be a common crisis point in women's careers. How is ECU, for instance, helping women to maintain their careers after having children?
Great question. I'm going to answer that, but just beforehand, I just want to pick up on the target issue. And I agree, having targets is good, and maybe it should be one or whatever. But if you want to make the target stick, then you have to have some teeth. So, I mean, I'd be very keen, and it certainly is in my case, I'd be very keen to have all the chief executives, including you, Andrew, have KPIs from their boards that require you to hit those targets. And if you don't hit them, then you don't get your bonus.
You'd be glad to know what
Or
we've got them.
well, I'm very pleased to hear it. But I think the vast majority of organisations don't have that. But if you did link it to CEO's remuneration, you'd hit those targets. I'm pretty sure, because of massive incentive there. You know, the chief executives are like that. They're Pavlovian organisms. They'll go to where the reward will be. And so I think we just need to put some teeth in. So that's my opinion on the targets. We can come back to quotas later. About the fact that, say, women might need to have maternity leave, or may just be caring leave. They may have because usually, as we know, it's the woman who has to bear that responsibility. Not always, but it usually is. So then there's a very difficult transition back to work. So how can you make that easier? And ECU's been looking at that. And I'll say immediately, it wasn't my ideas that we've adopted. It was thankfully driven by this force of nature known as COBE, a whole series of workshops that were organised and a real listening period to staff. And we did that over a year. And the sort of things that came back with were, well, look, when I got back, it was hard to get back into the network of research. I couldn't go to conferences because I had childminding facilities and I couldn't afford it. So, you know, we've now got an advancement scheme where you can apply and it will give you extra money to take your child with you to the conference. Or perhaps even hire a childminder to look after them while you're at a conference if it's not too far away. So that's one way. The other way, of course, is if you're coming back and you've been out of the loop, it's hard to get back into research. So we need to make sure that while you're on maternity leave, you're kept into the loop. We can enhance the transition back by perhaps giving you a break from teaching so that you've got time to develop your research. Or even instead of giving you the travel money, giving you money perhaps to hire a postdoc for a brief period of time to start activating your research. In addition to that, I think it's about what facilities are there when you come back as a woman coming back from maternity leave. And one of the things our staff told us was, you know, we have a creche, we have kind of childminder facilities, but what they asked for was a parenting room. And why would that be useful? Well, actually, you might be breastfeeding. You might want to express it. You might want to go somewhere private. You can continue to read the scientific paper or prepare your course while you're doing that. Or you might just want to go and take your child out of the creche for an hour, bring them in the parenting room, have time with them while you're continuing to work. And we've launched that now. There's a really, really lovely one that we opened recently, and we're going to roll that out across the university. And I think that the response has been overwhelmingly positive. Now, all of these are only little things, and I'm not suggesting they're the answer. But what I'm suggesting is if you have those little things and staff can see a commitment to, a progression in that area, it will make that transition easier. I'm not saying we've cracked it, there's a huge amount more to do, but I've learned the lesson over the years that if I'm going to continue to doing this, I need to continue to listen to what staff suggest and not come up with the ideas myself.
Steve, I just wondered too, where Australia's a long way behind the Nordic countries in terms of parenting leave, because there's a much higher percentage of males that end up on parenting leave.
Yeah.
And so it'll take a fairly big sort of cultural change to get to that point, won't it?
Well, it'll be a massive cultural change, but not just for universities and companies, but for governments and the country itself. Look, if you want to have an American taxation system and try to have a Norwegian living style, it's never going to happen. So, you know, the whole country has to think at what level do we want our social well-being to be, and how much are we prepared to pay for it? So that's a really core, fundamental question for what Australia wants to be like in the future.
Thank you. Libby, on that thread, what role do men play as stakeholders in gender equality? And then there's a second question, which is how can WA employers engage men in gender equity?
This is an issue for all of us. This isn't about women, and it's not about men, and it's not about women versing men and men versing women. This is actually an issue for all of us. We're talking about 50% of the population. We could call it a human rights issue. It's about all of us banding together and doing something that not only benefits the economy as a whole, because we know that women's workforce participation, improving it, will give us huge advantages economically to the tune of billions of dollars. So, but it's about ensuring that we can build a better lifestyle for ourselves and our children and our children's children moving forward. There is no reason today why a young woman graduating from university should receive a graduate salary that is less than her male counterpart, and yet it is still happening. It is still happening today in 2017. So we need to address that. So this is not about women and it's not about men, it's about us. And it's about us moving together. We can't move without helping one another. And in terms of, you know, in WA, I think that what we need are, you know, the great advocates like Stephen and Andrew moving out and pushing that message and talking about it, talking about the right things to the right audiences, I guess. Because if you're out talking to a group of businessmen, they're only interested in the business case. They want to know what's going to be good for their shareholders. They want to know what's going to be good for their bottom line. I think the other thing too is we need to challenge boards. We need to challenge boards to have this whole issue of gender equality as a standing item on every board's agenda, so that they're getting updated metrics, they're understanding what's happening, they are holding executives accountable through KPIs, and through KPIs that hit the hip pocket, as you say, Stephen, because nothing works better than knowing you're not going to get your bonus unless you meet these KPIs. And just as, and I think the other thing men can do, challenge behaviours of other men. As a woman that's worked her way through, you know, the resources industry and telecoms and a number of others, I could never walk past an injustice. I could never walk past somebody who was treating somebody else unfairly, no matter, particularly if it was around the fact that they were male or female or what they were saying or whatever. It got me into a lot of trouble, I have to tell you. It comes with a health warning. But I couldn't walk past it. And I think it's incumbent on all of us, but particularly men, to challenge those who, for instance, are knocking back somebody who's put in a flexible work request. To say, why are you doing that? That person, you know, has commitments outside work. You'll probably get better results from that employee if you allow them to work flexibly. We need to challenge that, and it needs to come from men to other men, not just from women, because otherwise we'll just be accused of, you know, harping on again. But the other thing that I'd say too is sometimes it's necessary to take the decision making out of the hands of middle managers. There's this fabulous term called the Permafrost, and the Permafrost is this group, it's often a group of middle managers in an organisation who are preventing advancements in the areas of gender equality and all sorts of other new initiatives, because the organisation says, this is what we're doing, this is our new policy, all roles flex. But when it comes to the individual applying to their manager to work flexibly, it's being knocked back. So what Telstra did was they said, right, well, we're taking that decision making out of your hands. It's all roles flex, if not, why not? And if you knock somebody back, you've got to take it to the top. And there aren't many middle managers that are prepared to go to Andy Penn and justify why they've knocked it back. So sometimes it's just very practical things and, to be frank, sort of courageous things that you have to do, like take the decision making out of the hands of middle management.
Libby, I think that statement about if you walk past it, you condone it, is a very important one. I'm fortunate to work alongside quite a number of male champions in our gender balance team, driving forward with Athena Swan. And it's quite interesting that some of the gender equality events that we go to, if one of the male, colleagues has come with us, he will be the only one there at a forum of sometimes hundreds. And some women went up to Matt at one of the forums and said, "So why are you here?" And that was very interesting for us, because I think that the male champions on the team would argue very strongly that they're doing it for the reasons that you outlined. It's as important to them as it is to us, and we're really clear that it's not about fixing the women or the women leading the charge. I know that I'm in this role, not because I'm a woman, but because Steve felt that I'd be able to do the job. Okay, so the next question is up to all of you. I'm trying not to get knocked over in the rush. How do you increase the number of women in male-dominated industries and vice versa? And then what role can employers play in that? Can they play a role at all?
Maybe if I could go first,
Sure.
because I'm from probably one of the most male-dominated industries. So resources in WA is something like 18% female. And as Libby said, the WA workforce overall is in a poor place. It was 44% or so against the other states. So what we've got is a significant underrepresentation. You can think about the reasons for that. Really the question is, so what do we do about it? And as employers, there's a lot that we can do about it. For the last few years, we've made sure our graduate hiring programs have been 50-50. And that has actually taken a lot of discipline to make that happen. It sounds easy, 50-50, but actually it takes a lot of work, and we've delivered that. And we know that the benefits of that will come through over time. We've got to make sure that we keep bringing people and keeping people with us through their careers. There's some areas where we look to hire people externally from the market, and we're in the process of starting up a new project, the Prelude Floating LNG project. It's the world's first open ocean floating LNG plant. So when it comes to the who do you hire, you are looking for people who have got mastery of what they do, and we went out and we hired people, and unfortunately we ended up with a really imbalanced workforce because we were hiring from the existing pool of people who had worked in that industry.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've started to do is we recognised where we ended up, and in the next round of recruitment, we're looking for people who have got transferable skills. So we appreciate that we will put more effort into training, but for example, you can convert somebody who is a financial planner into a maintenance planner. A lot of the sort of underlying skills are much the same, and by being more open about what are the characteristics of people you're looking, we've done much better in our next round of recruiting. And the first round of recruiting would have been probably representative of the resource sector, 18%, and the next round is over 30%. That's some of the things that the companies can do. I think one of the obvious other things to do is make sure that you actually do pay equal pay for equal work. We've been working that on for a number of years, and this year we've finally got to the point where, on average, we pay women 0.27% more than we pay men. And the keys to doing that is a lot of persistence. There's no shortage of engineers and people who love numbers in our company, and our pay system is very structured. And that has helped a lot with sort of bringing inequities to the surface and dealing with them. But nevertheless, it's taken a lot of other interventions, like making sure that when we hire people from the market and the man argues for money, and it appears on average women don't argue as much about their starting salary, is to make sure that we don't allow that pay inequity to be imported into our company. So there is an awful lot that the employer can do. Quite a bit of it, I think, needs to, as we address this representation issue, is going to have to be on the supply side as well.
So you like stories, Kobe. When I took over a previous university some years ago and I took back their annual report, in the back of it, which was a very beautiful document, very nice and glossy, it had a picture of all of the people who'd received honorary graduates. There were some fantastic people, great scientists, etc. I showed that to my wife. I said, oh, look at that, look at all that. It's fantastic, these graduates. And she said, yeah, there's something wrong with that, isn't there, Steve? I said, what's wrong with it? It's great. I'm glad to be here. She said, there is something wrong with it. Look again. And I said, oh my God, there's no women. What that showed me immediately was two things. One, I didn't notice that. And what's that? That's called unconscious bias. I wasn't looking for that. Once you see it, it's quite stark, because I know we're about 27 of them, or however many. It was a big cohort. And I'm using that as a kind of conduit into how you get the middle managers, and that's by recruitment and promotion. But if you then thinking about recruitment, you could have a headhunter that brought you back 20 candidates, and if I'd been in my old way, I might not have noticed that all 20 of them were male. Mm-hmm. And actually, in that university, if you look at the cohort of honorary graduates now, you'll find it's probably 50-50 women. So it can be done. It's just that the easy route is to find people that look like you and sound like you and are from your background. But if you put the effort in, you can change that. But you have to have that awareness first. So I think the absolute key to get that to happen is to have unconscious bias training for every single person who is ever going to be involved in recruitment or promotion. Now, you know, that'll take a long time, but it would get you there in the end, I think.
I think, Stephen, you're absolutely right. I think being aware of your own unconscious bias is really, really important. And I'll tell you what mine is. And it shocked me when I discovered it, but nonetheless, very personal, but I will tell you. We've moved a little bit lately, and you have to find a GP. And I rang up the local medical practice near where we lived, and the receptionist very kindly said, yes, I can get you in to see Dr. Sarah Spears or whatever tomorrow at 3 o'clock. And I went, oh, you wouldn't have a male GP, would you? My unconscious bias. It had never, ever hit me before that I had a bias against women doctors. Shocking, isn't it?
Yep.
Absolutely shocking. But I'm prepared to fess up and tell you, but I know it now and I've addressed it. And it's really important. You have to know what your unconscious bias is, because it really does hamper your decision making. I think in terms of this, industrial segregation is a real issue in Australia. We'll move on from my little personal foibles, but it really is a big issue in Australia, and we really do have to address it. And I think this whole push to get more women into STEM is fabulous. My issue with it is, and universities are doing a great job in addressing that, my issue is, as I see it now, and I see it happening quite a lot, is that we have these wonderful women graduating with fabulous degrees in science and biochemistry and you name it, but they can't get jobs. And they can't get jobs, probably one of the reasons is this unconscious bias, because their CVs go up for a job that's advertised. And I think my view is that there's a lot of unconscious bias that comes in, and their CVs aren't really taken seriously because they're a woman. The lovely man who drives the taxi that I use a lot in Sydney has a gorgeous daughter who's just graduated with a fabulous degree in chemistry. She has been trying for 12 months to get a job. She got a very good degree. She's got two things working against her though. Not only is she a woman, but she's also a Muslim. And she's got a Muslim name. And he said to me, what can I do? And I said, look, I'll have a look at her CV, and I fiddled around with it a bit and whatever. What I really wanted to tell her was, change your name. Change your name. But how, this is what we're dealing with. So employers really need to step up here and do, exactly what Andrew says and Stephen says, and look at this and be fair. Don't eliminate 50% of the population, because guess what? You're eliminating 50% of the talent and you're going to miss out on it. So we really need to address that. Employers have to step up, recognising that universities are doing a fabulous job in educating these young women, but put your money where your mouth is, employers, and actually give these women some jobs. Take them on their merit. De-identify the CVs. No names, no gender. And then, ABS, that's how ABS got more women into it, purely by de-identifying CVs, and they reached their target of 40% women into management roles in 1 year by de-identifying CVs. So, and we need to do the same for men going into other, into female-dominated industries as well. We've really got to challenge ourselves and each other.
Thanks, Libby.
Can I just briefly add to that? Your point is exactly right, and there's a wealth of evidence backing it. And there's a fabulous Yale study, which I'm sure you're aware of, which was looking at the HE sector and how it would rate an individual. And they had two CV, well, they had a CV. They put a male name or a woman's name, and they asked the person to, what salary should this person have, what grade should they have, etc. And the woman was always several grades lower and several $1,000s lower. But the interesting thing, Libby, is it didn't matter whether a man or a woman was doing the rating. So that bias it's not just men that are causing the issue, it's women as well.
So Andrew, once women get the job, unless they work at Shell, or perhaps some other organisations, they won't be paid as much as men. So in WA, we've only got 23% of employers who've actually analysed their payroll for pay gaps. What do you think's stopping them?
So it's hard to understand what stops it. I appreciate getting your WGEA submission in. It does take a bit of work, I get that. But
So do I.
yeah, but I don't know why they wouldn't want to do it. It's I guess the thing is, if you do it, it's confronting. And then you've got to think about, well, what are the underlying reasons? And getting your head around, what are the underlying reasons? Years of service, occupations, market pressures, when you hired people, all sorts of things. So there is a lot of complexity to the reasons. But at the end of the day, the question is, well, what do you do about it? And that part of it I don't find quite so hard to make the first steps.
So what did Shell do about it once you'd done your pay gap analysis?
Well, we'd been doing pay gap analysis for probably 20 years. When we do our annual merit round, we look at lots of different splits, splits by seniority, splits by gender, splits by whether people have staff roles or frontline roles, because there's various different bits of bias that can come in, and we've been doing that for years. It was probably 2012 or so where I think we were sitting at about 3% imbalance, and my predecessor, who might be known to a few, Anne Pickard and I, get upset because at the end of the day, 3% is still wrong. 22% is really, really wrong, but so is 3%. Because what sits underneath that are a lot of stories. There's stories of you hired a man and a woman at the same time, and you paid one of them 10% more than the other. And each one of these people you've hurt in a way. So it was really then that we set after going after the last 3%. That took us about 3 years to address. But boy, there was a lot of work to do that. Things like making sure that people started on the right salaries, trying to make sure that we were looking for a diverse enough population when we were looking to fill jobs. And we've still got a long way to go to this point of segregation in the workforce. Amongst our technician community, we've still got quite a representation problem, and that's going to take. And these are great paying jobs. These are really great paying jobs. There's nobody who works on the floating LNG plant who will get paid less than $180,000 a year. These are great jobs, but we just haven't got enough women in. And we know that we miss out on getting the right culture because of that.
Thanks, Andrew. Steve, Libby talked about what happened at Telstra with the middle managers blocking, I guess, women advancing. And, you know, that's not the first time I've heard that they can be a key barrier to achieving gender equality. So I guess, what would you do to help middle managers change or to implement change in the right direction?
I think we've almost answered that question in what we were talking about earlier. If the middle manager has the right training and the right appreciation and the right awareness, one would hope they'd act in the right way. So one of the things that you would want to do, of course, is give that training. Unconscious bias training is one example, but there's a whole raft of that. I've seen many examples where there's been a promotion panel and where you haven't had that sort of training, where inappropriate things are said. Just accept it. That should not be accepted. Again, I should have spoken up at the time. You know, but maybe you're a junior member of that and you don't feel like speaking up. So you have to create also a culture and an environment where you can actually say to the Vice-Chancellor, that's a load of rubbish. And it should be perfectly okay for you to do that. And you should be able to challenge somebody's opinions if you don't think they're appropriate at those promotional recruitment committees. So I think we've from what we've said, I think we've addressed that point. And I would just basically say, it's all about the training, and actually it's senior management's fault if you don't do that. Again, you like stories, so I'll finish on the final story. There was one university in the UK, it will remain nameless, but it's in Yorkshire and it begins with L. They did an analysis and discovered that they didn't have enough women coming forward for promotion, they didn't have enough women middle managers, and they thought, well, this is terrible. The senior executive decided, we need to send women on training courses so they know how to get these things. They completely missed the point. It was them that needed to go on the training course and the middle managers, and not the women. So I guess it's all about the training.
Okay, so this is the last question, and it's to the whole panel again, and it's a WA specific one. As you know, this state's going through a period of economic change, but we're also in a election lead up, and diversification of the economy and jobs, they're big items for all the parties. How do you think going through that period of economic change can impact on achieving gender equality, gender equity initiatives?
It shouldn't affect it at all. In fact, if organisations are prepared to really address the issue, to get some policies and strategies in place and to action them in a real way, they will actually see their bottom line improve. They will see that they have a more innovative, inclusive workplace, and they will see that their thinking becomes more creative, and they will have a more productive workforce. So putting these sorts of strategies in place doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money. But it does take commitment, it takes will, and it does take a little bit of time. And so it's about, you know, if improving your business and improving the bottom line and being more productive and meeting KPIs and all of those sorts of things are important to anybody's business, and they want to impress the board, then actually addressing gender equality in a very real way that impacts everybody throughout the organisation will actually see them be far more successful. So economic times shouldn't matter.
Yeah, I guess people in WA I find are really good at understanding that we have these cycles, and it's a very robust community on that. And you know, the reality is these things will come along, and you've got to face them as an opportunity. You know, and then how do you make the most of the opportunity? And actually, in addressing this problem is quite good, because what you've got is quite a lot of people looking to change employer. So if you know, it's a great time to be out there looking for a more diverse workforce, because there's more people looking for to do different things. So I think it's just make the most of the opportunity, because you can't change it.
Libby nailed it for me. I agree with what you said.
Right. Okay. Let's open it up for some questions now. Our fabulous corporate events team are roving around with mics. And if you could just say your name, job, where you're from, some sort of context, that'd be great. Thanks. Danny.
Hi, Danny L. Brown. I'm the Operations Manager for the School of Medical and Health Sciences. Libby, you said at one stage, we don't know what we don't know, and then Andrew later on talked about women at the point of being hired and talking about salary. My personal experience, having been in different parts of the university and health workforce over the years, is that I've worked for organisations that actively discourage sharing information amongst people about our comparative salaries. So within that sort of culture where information is not shared and data is not known about what men are earning compared to women, how would individual women actually approach the discussion of negotiation of salary if we just don't know what the comparative salaries are for men versus women? Can we get that information, and how do where's the evidence base that we depend upon?
I can answer that question. We did some international research into that very thing. In Australia at the moment, there's legislation that allows clauses in contracts to prevent you in disclosing your salary. We looked internationally. The US are looking to perhaps change that legislation, although who knows now. The UK are also looking to change it. The fact of the matter is that we could find no evidence internationally that suggests that if you're allowed to disclose your salary, it improves the pay gap. We couldn't find anything. What I would say is that on our website, every organisation that reports into us, their report is publicly available without the remuneration data, but it's all publicly available. I encourage people to go there and look at it, and when you're looking for a new job or whatever, find out how they're tracking in the space. The other thing is, I think we as women are often our own worst enemies. We think that, well, we're on this salary, we don't know you know what, nothing's going to harm you if you actually say you want $15,000 more a year than you're on. Now, they can only say no, but we're not that good at negotiating for ourselves. And I was the worst in the world. And unfortunately, it took the death of my first husband for me to actually sit up and really take myself seriously and bargain hard, because I'd always had the reliance on that other income, and then all of a sudden it was just me. And I was the breadwinner. And it took that tragic event for me to wake up. I would encourage all women to just value yourself for who and what you are, and your value is as good as the man sitting beside you. Don't undervalue yourself. Ask for what you really believe deep down you deserve, and give it a go from there, and negotiate hard. It is hard, but once you do it, oh my word, there's some satisfaction.
And I think there is also a role for the employer here as well. It shouldn't just take the individual to want to negotiate hard. The employers should, at the time of hiring, recognise from the feedback they're getting about what the right market pay is, and be prepared to offer the woman that more significant increase than they otherwise would have got to get what is apparently the fair market pay.
Here and there.
Hi, my name is Margot Matthews. I'm self-employed, though I've lived the dream here in Western Australia in the minerals and energy sector as an engineer. You have all said that, I'll say some of the things you said, like targets themselves are not enough, the importance of training. You have your policy and then you've got to enact it. I guess this might be more for you, Andrew, as working for an organization, but have you considered using the framework of Plan, Do, Check, Act, like a management system, to ensure that you do thoroughly and systematically plan do your policy, check one of the things I think is most important, and you talked about it and gave examples of how you can address when flexible leave wasn't improved, where the non-conformances are. You have a policy of non-conformance because a particular individual didn't understand his or her training. You pick that up and addressed it. It's something that's worked very well in areas such as safety, where you are looking for a cultural change, which is what we're talking about. Again, having worked in minerals and energy, I know that I'm as much a part of the problem with my biases as anyone else is.
Yeah, indeed that's the way that we do work. I mentioned in my performance contract there's various diversity and inclusion targets in there. In the leadership, sort of leadership team performance metrics, there's all these targets in there, and they're subject to that regular review of, how are we going on this? What do we need to do differently to deliver the targets? And in the setting of next year's targets, about okay, so what stretch do we put on this?
But I guess I'm thinking more like the targets is just one part of the plan. Do check act? But have you ever considered doing the ISO management system framework, which Athena Swan is a version of? I happen to be working with Standards Australia on developing and using the ISO model. But that ensures that thoroughness.
Yeah, no, so I think that is the way that we work. It hasn't got the formality of a quality management system, but I think it is very much the way that we do work.
So you collect the non-conformances, because in Libby I'd ask, is that quite unique, collecting the non-conformances with your policies? That really, my experience shows a lot of benefit.
About where things have gone wrong.
Well, you said your policy says you're supposed to give flexible work to people, and I can't remember which one gave that great example about how you took it away from middle management and went up, which was a way of collecting your non-conformances, and in fact didn't lead to non-conformances because people didn't want to do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Kojo. I'm from the School of Arts and Humanities. I'm an academic there. I'm just enjoying the discussion, and I found out that discussions on pay gaps seems to present women as the victims, which is factual. But I'm interested to know what Libby's organization is doing in terms of addressing intersectionality, because there are different types of women. As a gender lecturer, I find that the discussion tends to favor white women.
We must understand the Act itself. The Act itself talks about addressing the issue of women and men in the workplace. It is very, very specific. The question you ask is asked of me often. There are a number of things we need to address to look at how we might include that. The first is actually looking at the Act itself, because it would need to be changed. And we have sought legal advice on that, and we are working within government more broadly on that. The other issue is one of privacy. Clearly, in any organisation, the number who may identify as that third category would be small. Those reports are made available publicly, and there is very much an issue around those individuals being able to be identified. So it is also an issue that we must address within government in terms of the Privacy Commission and all sorts of things. We are very aware of the issue, but I have to go back to the Act as it was written, and it was specifically written to address the issue of women and men in the workplace. So we have a lot of work, and government has a lot of work to address that issue, but it is very much, we are very aware of it, and I am asked about it often. So that's all I can say for the moment, because we would actually have to change the Act.
We've got a lot of questions over here and there.
Sorry, Liz Foley, do marketing communications with an engineering construction company, and I guess relevant to this, I'm also doing a master's on gender equality in the workplace, and probably specifically, I guess, in the resource industry. So question on it, probably you talked about unconscious bias in a recruitment process and promotion, but how do you leverage that across into other employees when you've got companies now achieving KPIs and targets at the end of the year, that you don't have that discrimination flow out into the rest of the workforce, that she only got the job because she's a woman and we need to reach that target? And I guess that goes across probably into Andrew, you mentioned about your second round recruitment, looking at increasing that female workforce through transferable skills. Are they then looked at as a second tier in that recruitment process, and I guess the transferable skills?
Yeah. So as far as I mentioned that achieving 50% graduates has taken quite a lot of work, and one of the things that we do is the assessment process that we use to select people is a demanding process, but it's a very consistent process, and we will only hire people who meet our criteria. So that means that anybody, sex, race, religion, whatever, who gets through that process is of a sufficient calibre to work for us, and that means that people don't have to worry about, well, I only got the job because I was a X or Y or Z. The story I shared around hiring of technicians, we're mindful of that. That's why we're going to make sure that the training program that those people receive is really sufficient so that we don't have that problem. And I must say, we've gone out of our way to make sure that the sort of people that we recruit are people who are open-minded and want the right sort of workplace. And I think this is an issue, that there are still workplaces around that are quite hostile to women. I know I started working, one of them, I started working in an oil refinery, where you had those horrible old things of pornography around the workplace. It wasn't comfortable to be a woman, and unfortunately that hasn't gone away in Australia yet everywhere. So we're trying to go out of our way to recruit people who are, have got the right sort of attitudes to life and that sort of stuff.
Sophia Nupius, I work in the School of Medical and Health Sciences here at UCU. I was just going to follow up because I think that maybe it was misheard what Quadro was asking. He was asking about intersectionality, so whether there's any reports or understanding or how you approach. You mentioned it actually as an example of maybe being Muslim and a woman, so the intersectionality of your race and or your religion and being a woman can sometimes be a confounding, so it's an exponential influence, particularly in the pay gap. At least from the United States, we've definitely seen that with African American, Hispanic women make less even than white women. So has there been anything in that in your organizations, and or is that part of this as well?
Again, it's in terms of the Act, we are bound by our Act, and it only mentions women and men. It doesn't mention any of those other factors. That's not to say that there's an issue out there, and in fact, I think that certainly in the states are doing great work in terms of gathering data around all those issues, ethnicity, all of those things. We as an agency are not, again, because we are bound by this Act. And I certainly believe that if we can address this issue around women and men, and we address the issue that affects 50% of the population, I firmly believe that the rest will follow. I think that we will end up with a far more just, socially equitable country and workplaces than we certainly have now.
I think just picking up on Sophia's question, and Sophia knows this very well because she's part of the leadership team, Athena Swan has a principle that's actually about gender diverse groups. And so perhaps in parallel, the whole WGEA compliance, employer of choice, and Athena Swan working at this point in time in this country, I'm hopeful that we will see the change as well.
It goes beyond gender, though. You're right. And the Yale study was followed up with a similar study where they changed the name from an Anglo name to a Hispanic name, and the same results happened. I was at the away day for the School of Business and Law yesterday, and there were 19 new appointments. And they were of all ethnic origins, a lot of women. So I felt elated by that experience, the type of people we were getting. We probably have got unconscious bias against intersection, you're right, we probably there are a few people like that. But if you look at the makeup of the staff at ECU, I'm sure you will agree, it's incredibly diverse. This is one of the most diverse organisations for both staff and students that I've ever worked for in my life in any part of the world.
Yeah, so I think the approach that we try to take, I think it's the right one, is that we focus on diversity, not on gender, and the clarity that we get on things through looking at things through a gender lens really helps the progress around treating everybody fairly regardless. So I think to Libby's point, the more progress we make on addressing the gender issues, the more progress we'll make on addressing all the others, because the what it takes to get right, I think, is very. If we solve one, we'll probably we do make a lot of progress in solving the other.
We've probably got time for about 2 more questions, maybe 3 at a pinch.
Hello, my name is Sarah Hale. I'm a Human Resources Manager at John Holland. And my question, I suppose, takes one step beyond introducing women into traditionally male-dominated industries. Studies show that females that go into male-dominated industries generally don't stick around long-term in their career. And to the panel, how important are retention programs, particularly in traditionally male-dominated industries, to closing the gender pay gap, and what is it about them that makes them successful?
Maybe I'd go at that too. So look, I actually think it is really important to get the retention piece right. Certainly in our firm, senior leaders will have, odds are, worked in the probably our company, but at least the industry for 20 plus years. So we've not only got to get the 50% female graduates in, but we've got to keep them through all the life changes and have delivered the career development. And that's no easy task. And it's things like, in our firm, people will often have worked in numerous cultures, in numerous countries. And that doesn't necessarily suit everybody. And particularly these days, it doesn't necessarily suit everybody. So we've tried to work on how do you get people early international experience before, for example, they have a family, because we know that it's much harder to get them that experience once they've had a family. These are some of the reasons why, whilst we might have 50% graduate recruitment at the leadership team, we'll be around 22% or so. And that is one of our challenges. Now, typically now, we are getting everybody back from maternity leave. So the issue isn't necessarily so much about retaining people, it's keeping the career progression going, and that's still our challenge.
I think too that one of the reasons I believe we're seeing so few female CEOs is that by and large, organisations do not appoint CEOs without operational experience. So we need organisations to start actively promoting and moving women into operational roles so that they have that grassroots experience. If, for instance, you're talking about the resources industry, of managing a mine, for instance, of knowing what's involved, of understanding the real core of what that business is about. We need to see more women getting more experience, more financial experience across organisations and things like that. Traditionally, women are in the legal roles, the HR roles, the corporate affairs roles. We need to see that broadened and women getting very real experience in operations, and that way we will see more women advance the career ladder and make their way to CEOs. So, but that takes commitment from the organisations. But if organisations are committed to that, you can bet your bottom dollar that by and large the women will be committed to it too.
Well, yeah, but this is career advice I give to quite a few people. You have to take a chance and back yourself.
That's right.
And that is unfortunately sometimes not the case, that people won't take the challenges.
And we've got lots of stories that like that.
You've absolutely got to back yourself and take the chance and do that thing that you're not comfortable with.
I agree with both my colleagues. To allow more questions, I'd simply say no one wants to leave ECU.
Can I just get people to show their hands? Simone's got a question down here in the front row. Simone over here, we've got two up there. That might lead, let's say that's our last three questions. Simone, and then I can't quite see you in the dark, but two more up there. Should I go ahead?
Yes, it's Ellen Gray from the School of Medical and Health Sciences. Yes, I recently went to a conference for melanoma research, and we have a gender equality session, and the presentation actually was from a study, might be Harvard or Yale, but basically it was a study that this bias in gender actually comes almost within and at the age of 6. Actually, girls at the age of 6 were able to define that the most smart in the classroom were the boys, but the ones that get the best marks were the girls. But at that point, they were already defined that somehow the boys were smarter. And of course, that is this self-deprecating selection of jobs, which will go for jobs that are more associated with interaction with people or more empathy needed, compared to jobs that are what you would think require intelligence, which could be math, engineering, even philosophy. Apparently is more enriched by men in that agenda. And the thing is, that kind of translates, and it was quite interesting to hear from Andrew that they have this idea that girls will, that this policy that if the guy negotiates a pay gap higher than the women's don't, the institution actually have this policy of trying to minimize that impact. And I don't think that is actually very broad policy. I'm not even sure whether even ECU has something in place to kind of minimize the effect of negotiation in gender equality.
So that's your question, does ECU have something in place?
Well, my question is that, whether ECU have something in place, and perhaps more, another comment is, it's something that needs to be drilled into the girls quite early on, and even within the university as a preparation for the workforce, is to actually have this career advice that you as a woman have the right to also negotiate the pay gap, because women usually will not negotiate that. And I see it in myself.
I think you should answer it, and you should use the story of the schoolgirls that are being asked to draw pictures of, of employment.
So we do know that gender stereotypes are formed between 5 to 7 years of age, and 2 days after International Women's Day last year, 2016, a video was released from the UK where school children in that age bracket were asked to draw a firefighter, a medical doctor, and all sorts of things. And I think from memory it was 61 of the kids, 61% drew a male in roles that should not be male dominated by any means. And so when the women came in their uniforms, so to speak, the children laughed and said, "Oh, you're just dressed up, they're pretending." And so that was 2016. So we do know that we've got lots and lots of stories that very early on children learn who's in charge of the vehicle, because automatically the man often jumps in the driver's seat and it's not negotiated openly in front of the kids. Look, I think that self-talk, gender stereotyping happens, but then that self-deprecating talk you've identified, I won't apply for this job, or I won't try and negotiate a salary because I'll look stupid, or I won't get the job and I'm really lucky to even have the job at all. All those things need to be redressed actively. So organisations can do a lot, and one of the things that organisations need to do is actually try and help individuals and women to actually get past some of that kind of internal negative self-talk.
Yeah, and I'd just add one story. It doesn't end when they're children. A brief story, I was at an award ceremony, and the person who won the award for the best person, and I won't go into what that area was, went up to receive it. It was a woman, and this was a woman at the peak of her career, leading her field, and she thanked a lot of people, and towards the end of her speech, and this is a big audience at the conference centre, she said, and I'd like to thank blah blah blah, I'd like to apologise to my husband for all the time that the fridge was empty and the wash basket was full. Now, God, couldn't he fill the fridge himself? Did he know how to use the washing machine? But the point is that that woman, at that level of her career, felt it was appropriate to apologise to her husband. Now, that's entrenched all the way through her life, and I don't know what I would have felt like if I was a young woman in that audience, but it would have been demoralising.
Hold on a minute, my second office is the laundry. I enjoy it.
You might, but would you apologise to your husband if it's full?
Certainly not. You can find someone else to do it.
Okay, I think we've got our last two questions. Simone and who was it? Oh yeah, there's one there and one in the front.
I think one of the earlier questions addressed this, but I wondered if we could just go back to it, and that's the question of merit. So if you have targets or if you have quotas, if you have a dedicated program, the counter to that is, look, that's okay, but we actually appoint on merit, so we don't need those sort of targets. And I'll go into this, not because it's election time by any means, but I think it just really starkly illustrates the point. The party that I represent in Parliament started just over 20 years ago with a quota system. We started low at about 30%, and at the moment it's been growing over that time, and at the moment we've got 20-20-40 in WA, and in a couple of years it'll go to 50-50. And on our side in Parliament, State Parliament, there's 47% women. On the other side, which doesn't have a quota system, they have 22% women. Now, to me, that just speaks volumes about having specific quotas, having adherable quotas, but what we continue to get, and I'm not just talking about political parties, I'm just saying, or whether that's in Parliament, I'm talking about whether you say we are going to have 30%, 40%, 50%, but we continue to get that merit argument thrown back time and again. So I just wondered if you could just elaborate on that point.
So I don't think having targets with teeth is, and appointing by merit, two things that don't go together. I think they go together. What makes them go together is being serious about it and getting organised and giving yourself the time to do it. So I spoke about what we did with graduates, and at the different levels we have targets, and they will, performance against those targets will impact on how people get their pay rises. But you've got to get organised, otherwise it's just a hope that you'll get there. And we appoint by merit, but we make progress. But you've got to have the programs that allow you to do both. Making sure you've always got a female on the shortlist, making sure the people who are doing the selection have got the appropriate seniority and training to do the selection, and then we make progress.
It sounds great, but I mean, let's cut to this meritocracy rubbish almost. Everybody says they appoint on merit. Every time we have an interview, we say we appoint on merit. And I know people will say, personally I would go for quotas, but I know that lots of people don't like it. And most of the resistance I would get would probably be from women using the argument you're saying, I don't want to be thought of having got it because I'm a woman. Look, because of unconscious bias, most of the guys who got the jobs got it because they were a man. All right, so I just think the playing field is so uneven that if you don't have something serious, teeth maybe, quotas I would go for, you won't get it. We will have to wait 70 years before we get that doing this. Now is the time to stop being patient and say, it's just not good enough. But we do have to have the support of people saying, if someone says, oh, you only got it because you're a woman, to say back, but you only got it because you're a man, because of the... So I just don't think the system's fair, and I'd rather we did something more serious.
I think, Simone, both systems can work. We would support targets at the agency. The reason we would support targets is we see that you get better cultural change if you have targets, because you get the buy-in from your workplace. However, you have to implement it, as Andrew says, you have to implement it properly, and that means making people accountable. They have to be accountable for the targets. So we think both can work, but we really believe that in a workplace, targets with teeth, targets that make managers accountable, targets that make everybody accountable, will drive the cultural change that will see it become normal.
Now, we've got a question up here, and then I think we've still got a question next to Danny. Yeah? No, sorry, in front of you. She had her hand up a long time ago. Yeah. And then I missed one over here, Janelle Ma, who's on our governing council. So when, Janelle? Yeah, you've got a question?
Alec Miles. I work in the School of Medical and Health Science as an academic. Previously in industry, I was a paramedic, so in a male-dominated industry. And my husband is actually a firefighter at the moment. I've recently just returned from maternity leave, and my question is, I like your point about trying to get women to go overseas for work to enhance their careers and be operational, but when you've got a partner that's in a male-dominated industry where flexibility isn't supported, how do we empower our men to support the women to go into the operational field or overseas to enhance careers?
That's a really hard one, because mobility is such an individual circumstance. We do things like, we have a number of dual career couples, so both work for us, and then we will go out of our way to find the partner a job in whatever location to give more mobility. But it doesn't work for everybody. What we try increasingly to do is get people before they're at that point, when they are still really mobile. But yeah, there's I guess the other thing that we do is try to give people international experience without being mobile. So get people to work in project teams where people are working remotely, they're working with people from other cultures. Now, it's not the same, but it does give you some of that experience.
I think this is just really a very personal thing. I live in Perth, and my wife lives in Edinburgh. She's got a fantastic career at a world-leading university, and I've a lovely career here. It is really, really hard. And if we could have done something else, we would certainly have done it. But why should she? The obvious one was, well, you have to come to Perth. Well, why? So I realised that I'm going to have to go home tonight and cook my own dinner, and I'll be by myself and freeze in bed. But it's the right thing to do, rather than just demand that your wife has to join you and give up her career. And in fact, if I look back in the past, we've lived in the US and various other places, and she's always followed me, and it's not been fair. And I have to admit that I never really thought that in the past, because I was a terribly biased person, that I was making any imposition. Now I look back and I realise the complete unfairness of the whole situation. So I don't think there's an answer there. It's really, really personal.
But I think the point that you make is, how do we get those male-dominated industries to recognise that flexibility is important? Look, and I guess it comes back to the data. You know, I'm a firm believer that data is going to drive change. You cannot refute the numbers. So it's about, you know, trying to bring that conversation into the workplace at all levels and start talking to the data and look at the industry data and bring it to the table. I mean, I can't think of any other way that you're going, you know, that these organisations are going to start it, but try to make all, you know, these managers aware of what's going on. The fact that Stephen and Andrew are out talking and banging on about the business case for it, and the more men and women we get talking about that, but particularly the men to the other men in the male-dominated industries, I think will help.
Thanks, Seleka, for the question. That's generated a lot of debate. Janelle, have you got one last one?
Yeah. My question was very similar around is there anything in particular that you're seeing around increasing flexibility for men?
What we do know, we know that more and more men are wanting to take an active role in caring in home life. We know that more men and women want to work flexibly, not just because this isn't all about caring for children. It's about caring for elderly parents. It's about caring for people with disabilities. And we know that more people have more, they've got more responsibility in these areas now, and we need to start providing these more flexible arrangements in the workforce. And for organisations who aren't offering it, we're finding young men and women leaving. They're leaving to go to the organisations that are leading the way in this regard. They're changing careers and going to organisations that will allow them flexibility for their own well-being, the well-being of their families, and guess what? The employers are the winners as well.
I think many organisations, the culture develops around the CEO and the senior team, and if the senior team seem to be going or picking up the kid from school or whatever, and that's perfectly acceptable, everyone else in the organisation thinks, well, that's okay. You know, you have the big New York finance firms where no one will leave until the CEO's gone and all of that sort of stuff. That's the wrong way. So I guess my answer is, if you have enough people leading, for example, it becomes acceptable and people just do it.
We would probably have 5 women with flexible working arrangements for every man. So we've got a way to go. What we're trying to do is publicise more the men who are doing it, to make it more okay for more men to ask for it. The policy work is all done. There's no issues around the policy. What we've got to do is get more men to ask. Clearly they want to, but they want the time flexibility. We've just got to get it okay for them to ask for it. And then for middle managers to help them work out how to do it, and work with them to get it to happen.
Okay, thanks. On that note, we're going to conclude the forum. A special thanks to Libby and Andrew. Here's a small token of our appreciation. Thank you for your insights and your experience. And Steve, you were pretty good too. And our gift to you is join us for afternoon tea. So we've got some light refreshments out there. Thank you so much for coming and for such a lively session. I wish we could have gone on, but people have got things to do. Thank you very much.